Welcome to This Explainer. You know, when we picture the Great Sphinx of Giza, we usually imagine this single, timeless monument, right? Like it was just carved perfectly from stone by one ancient visionary and left there for eternity. But what if I told you the Sphinx is actually less of a static statue and more like a continuously evolving patchwork quilt? Based on Mark Lehner's groundbreaking 1991 dissertation, Archaeology of an Image, we're going to explore how the Sphinx is literally an ever-changing tapestry of history, built on layers upon layers of ancient repairs.
Okay, let's dive into this because it presents a seriously fascinating archaeological mystery. How do you actually decode the true history of a colossal statue when the surface you're looking at today isn't even the original stone? I mean, we're talking about millennia of patches, added blocks, and total restorations. To answer that, we have to move past the fun tourist facts and really ground ourselves in the rigorous science. Between 1979 and 1983, Mark Lehner conducted 5 straight years of systematic field study out at the Sphinx. And he wasn't just looking at the overall shape of the thing, he was studying its stratigraphy. That's the actual physical layers of masonry and stone that were added over thousands of years by entirely different generations of people.
Part 1. Mapping the Great Sphinx.
Think about it. You simply cannot understand a monument this complex without first documenting every single inch of it. And believe it or not, that was a monumental challenge that had never been systematically undertaken before Lehner's study. He had to painstakingly break down the sheer scale of the Sphinx's anatomy. We're talking about the core body, the surrounding excavated terraces, the masonry veneer, which are basically those outer layers of repair blocks, and the masonry boxes built on the sides. It is an incredibly complex architectural landscape to try and make sense of. So to map all these intricate features precisely, Lehner and his team relied heavily on a brilliant tool called photogrammetry. Basically, this is a technique that uses 3D coordinates derived directly from photographs to map the exact elevations and complex contours of a structure. It effectively allowed the researchers to digitally peel back the onion of the monument's layered history. They could document every ancient crack, every eroded recess, and every single repair block, all without damaging any of the fragile stone.
Part 2. Khafre's colossal creation. To truly understand the layers of repair, we have to travel all the way back to the baseline. We're talking the 4th dynasty, around 2500 BC. Now, a very common misconception is that the original creator, Pharaoh Khafre, built the Sphinx from the ground up, block by block, kind of like how the pyramids were built. But as Lehner's study outlines, Khafre's builders actually quarried a massive U-shaped sanctuary. They dug straight down into the natural limestone bedrock of the Giza Plateau. They left this massive core of stone right in the center, and then they carved and shaped that into a colossal lion.
And those millions of tons of bedrock they removed, there is no way they just threw that away. Those quarried, multi-ton core blocks were hauled right next door to construct the massive Khafre Valley Temple, as well as the Sphinx Temple on the terrace just in front of the statue. So the very act of carving the Sphinx literally built the surrounding sacred precinct. Talk about ancient efficiency.
Part 3. A millennium of neglect. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it marks a totally dramatic pivot in our story. After the glorious 4th dynasty, the grand vision for the site just halted, completely abruptly. For nearly a millennium, the unfinished Sphinx was abandoned, completely swallowed by the desert sands, and it lacked any sort of organized cult. But fast forward nearly 1,000 years to the 18th dynasty, and we see this massive resurgence. The Sphinx is dug out, elevated to a huge cult following, and directly worshipped as the god Horemheb.
Part 4. The First Great Restoration.
Almost a millennium after it was first carved, this renewed religious fervor led New Kingdom rulers on what was essentially an immense rescue mission to clear the sand and save the crumbling body of the Sphinx. Rulers like Thutmose IV and Amenhotep II weren't just clearing sand, though. They were reverent restorers, entirely transforming the site. They added a royal chapel right at the base of the Sphinx's chest. They repaired the divine beard. There's even evidence they added a colossal royal statue right under that beard. Plus, they built these large masonry boxes on the flanks to serve as pedestals for even more statues and shrines. But honestly, one of the most incredible details from Lehner's research is this. To repair the severely eroded core body of the Sphinx, these 18th dynasty restorers used limestone slabs that they stripped directly from Khafre's own pyramid causeway. It is just this brilliant mix of historical irony and pure engineering practicality. They effectively cannibalized the neighboring 4th dynasty monuments just to save the Sphinx. And they deeply mythologized the site while they did it too. Right between the Sphinx's front paws sits Thutmose IV's famous Dream Stela. The text on it mysteriously refers to the site as the Sanctuary of Horamakhet beside Sokar in Rosatau. That word, Rosatau, it has a deeply fascinating dual meaning. As the study notes, it translates literally to the place of dragging, which perfectly describes the heavy, grueling physical labor of dragging massive stone blocks around the Giza Plateau. But it was also elevated to serve as the name for a mythical domain of the Egyptian underworld. So the physical reality of the site's massive labor and its deep spiritual mythology became completely intertwined. Part 5, reading the masonry layers. So how do we actually know the chronological sequence of all these ancient repairs? Well, let's walk through the life cycle of the Sphinx's forepaws to clearly see how the stratigraphy built up over time. Step 1. The paws are carved from the original, solid bedrock. Simple enough? Step 2. Over that first millennium of neglect, they're severely weathered into deep recesses by wind and natural elements. Step 3. Those 18th dynasty restorers come in and fill those deep recesses with large limestone blocks, which Leonard designates as F masonry or phasi blocks. And finally, step 4, the newly repaired paws are eventually sealed and preserved once again by encroaching drift sand.
So, the crucial point is understanding this insider terminology. When Leonard talks about Phase 1 or F masonry, he is identifying the absolute earliest layer of large restoration blocks on the Sphinx. By meticulously mapping these specific stones, archaeologists can perfectly trace the 18th dynasty's desperate efforts to restore the original contours of a statue that was already severely weathered.
Leonard explains that by carefully examining areas where later, outer layers of masonry were actually removed or destroyed over time, they could literally see down to the underlying F masonry. Finding this phasi masonry packed tightly into deep recesses proves undeniably that by the time the 18th dynasty arrived, they found a deeply eroded, highly weathered core that desperately needed patching. Think about that for a second. The Sphinx was already incredibly ancient to the ancients themselves.
And this really brings Lehner's incredible systematic study to its culmination. By painstakingly mapping every bedrock contour, every Phase 1 repair block, and every added chapel wall, the study uses computer imaging to visually reconstruct exactly what this patched, restored, and newly revered monument looked like at the absolute height of its 18th dynasty glory.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought for today's explainer. When you look at the Sphinx today, you aren't just looking at Khafre's 4th dynasty vision. You're looking at a layered canvas of human reverence. It's filled with 18th dynasty blocks stripped from older causeways, massive New Kingdom chapels, later Roman repairs, and even modern conservation efforts. If a monument is continuously repaired over centuries with pieces of its own history, at what point does it become a completely new creation entirely? It's a fascinating way to rethink the true identity of the ancient sites we marvel at. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the layers of what you see.